There are moments in war when a pilot sits alone with a machine and realizes the next few seconds may decide not only his fate, but the fate of every man who will ever fly that aircraft again. In February 1944, as winter winds scraped across the Bell Aircraft Factory in Buffalo, a Soviet test pilot lowered himself into the cockpit of an American machine he barely trusted. The engineers around him argued quietly, tensely about whether this flight might kill him. They spoke of numbers, tolerances, margins of safety. But Andrei Kochetkov had flown enough aircraft to know when something felt wrong. And this one felt wrong. What he sat inside would become known as the P-63 Kingcobra, an American World War II fighter built not for American pilots but for men fighting half a world away. On paper, it promised to be everything its troubled predecessor, the P-39 Airacobra, was not. In reality, no one yet knew the truth. Was it a savior or another coffin with wings? Before we can understand whether the P-63 deserves a place among the great World War II dogfighters, we must follow the man who dared to test it at the edge of a spin that almost took his life. War has a way of exposing the truth about machines. On the Eastern Front, that truth had been brutal. Long before the P-63 Kingcobra appeared, Soviet pilots had learned to fear its predecessor, the P-39 Airacobra, another American World War II fighter, whose design placed the engine behind the cockpit and the cannon through the propeller hub. At low altitude, it was fast, heavily armed, and capable of killing German fighters with a single, well-placed burst. But it carried a hidden flaw, one that revealed itself without warning, a vicious, unrecoverable flat spin. To Soviet pilots, the Airacobra was both a weapon and a gamble. They respected its firepower, even admired its rugged frame and warm cockpit during the -40-degree winters. Yet they flew it knowing that a simple mistake, an over-aggressive maneuver, a momentary lapse while chasing a Messerschmitt could send the aircraft flipping into a spin no pilot could escape. Doors jammed, controls locked. Stories spread across regiments about men who never returned from routine training flights. The Airacobra earned a grim nickname, the Flying Coffin. Still, the Soviets kept flying it. They had no choice. In 1943, they were fighting for survival against the Luftwaffe, and every fighter Soviet-built or Lend-Lease was thrown into the sky. Officially, the P-39 was supposed to be used only in the Far East under the Lend-Lease agreement, not against Germany. Unofficially, entire regiments slipped them into combat on the Western Front. German pilots began reporting encounters with unfamiliar mid-engine fighters. Some thought they were captured American aircraft. Others believed the Americans were secretly aiding the Soviets. The truth was simpler: the Red Air Force was desperate, and desperation ignores paperwork. So when Bell Aircraft introduced a new machine, a supposedly improved successor to the Airacobra, the Soviet Union paid attention. The new fighter was larger, stronger, more powerful. Its name would be P-63 Kingcobra, and on paper, it promised to fix the Airacobra's worst sins: better high-altitude performance, improved handling, stronger structure, and refined weaponry. America tested it, compared it to the P-51 Mustang, and decided it did not meet their needs. For American doctrine for long-range escort, the Mustang was king. So the United States ordered the P-63 into production, mostly for export. The Soviets refused to accept it blindly. They had lost too many pilots to spin accidents to trust any mid-engine design again. They insisted on sending their own expertsmen who would not be swayed by charts or optimistic test reports. One was engineer Fedor Saprun, a man who understood how a few misplaced kilograms could doom a fighter. The other was the calm, sharp-minded pilot, Andrei Kochetkov, already veteran of more than 2,000 flight hours, a man unafraid to push an aircraft until it either obeyed or tried to kill him. Together, they traveled to Buffalo, New York, not to praise a new marvel of aviation, but to find out whether this American World War II fighter would save Soviet lives or become the next tragedy disguised as a World War II dogfighter. When Andrei Kochetkov first lifted the P-63 Kingcobra off the runway at Buffalo, the fighter seemed eager to impress. It climbed cleanly, rolled smoothly, and responded with the crispness expected of a new American World War II fighter. Yet beneath the polished surface, something felt unsettled. Kochetkov described it later as a subtle weight behind him, a whisper of imbalance rather than a shout just enough to warn a seasoned pilot that this aircraft carried secrets. He knew the next step was unavoidable. The Soviet Air Force needed to understand the aircraft's behavior at the edge of the envelope, where a true World War II dogfighter either proves itself or betrays its pilot. So Kochetkov requested spin testing. Bell's engineers resisted. The aircraft had already passed American evaluations. It wasn't meant to fight for the United States, so why risk damaging it? But Kochetkov insisted, and eventually the Americans relented cautiously, reluctantly. At 12,000 feet, he pulled the P-63 into a deliberate spin entry rudder and power-reduced, nose dropping into rotation. The first seconds were routine. Then the routine ended. As Kochetkov applied recovery controls opposite rudder forward stick, the aircraft ignored him. The spin flattened. The nose refused to drop. The world outside began to circle in a wide, sickening rotation, silent except for the growing strain in the airframe. He tried again. Full opposite rudder, forward stick to the limit. Neutral ailerons, nothing. The P-63 Kingcobra wasn't recovering. It was sinking in a wide, deadly spiral, the same kind that had killed so many P-39 pilots. The structure creaked under the loads as though the tail were being twisted apart. At 5,000 feet, Kochetkov prepared to bail out. He reached for the door handle, knowing all too well that the centrifugal force might trap him inside. And then suddenly the nose dropped. Not because of anything he had done, simply because the airflow changed as he fell through the sky. The Kingcobra pulled itself out of the spin just in time. Back on the ground, Bell's engineers inspected the fighter and found what Kochetkov already knew: the rear fuselage had buckled. The metal had bent under stress that the aircraft should have survived. Supran studied the design data and revealed the deeper truth: the center of gravity, once fuel and ammunition were added, shifted too far aft. In a spin, the mass behind the cockpit overpowered the pilot's control authority. No skill could fix physics. What followed was an unusual partnership. American engineers and Soviet specialists worked side by side to reposition equipment, add ballast reinforced structure, improve armor, move the cannon forward, and expand ammunition supply. When Kochetkov tested the modified model, the fighter behaved differently, still tail-heavy but predictable. It no longer tried to kill him. For the first time, the P-63 Kingcobra felt like what it was meant to be: a rugged, maneuverable American World War II fighter, ready to become a formidable World War II dogfighter, but only after being reshaped by the men who had nearly died discovering its flaws. The journey of the P-63 Kingcobra did not end on a test range in Buffalo. For Soviet pilots to fly it in war, the aircraft had to survive a far harsher trial, one fought not against enemy fighters, but against the brutal, indifferent geography of the far north. The ferry route that carried the Kingcobra from America to the Soviet Union was one of the most dangerous air corridors of the Second World War. Pilots took off from Buffalo and crossed the continental United States before turning north through Canada. From Edmonton to Fort Nelson, from Watson Lake to Whitehorse, the airfields were little more than outposts carved into wilderness. Navigation aids were primitive. Weather changed without warning. Clouds swallowed mountain peaks whole. Many of the men ferrying these machines were young Americans who had never flown in such conditions. Engines failed in sub-zero temperatures. Aircraft vanished into valleys wrapped in fog. Some pilots simply disappeared across the northwest staging route, their American World War II fighter buried forever under snow and rock. Then came Alaska Fairbanks, then Nome, and beyond it, the most unforgiving stretch of all, the Bering Strait. 55 miles of freezing water, no emergency landing sites, no reliable radio guidance. If a pilot went down here, he lasted minutes. Soviet crews took over at Fairbanks, flying the final leg into Siberia, where even the airfields themselves were hazards. Icy runways, crude maintenance, and storms that could trap aircraft for days. By late 1944, hundreds of P-63 Kingcobra fighters reached Soviet territory. Officially, they were destined for the Far East. Unofficially, whispers began to circulate reports from German pilots claiming to see unfamiliar mid-engine fighters over East Prussia and the Courland Pocket. Soviet memoirs written decades later hinted that some elite regiments quietly replaced their P-39s with the improved Kingcobras. No paperwork confirmed it, but battles rarely wait for bureaucracy, and war often leaves its traces in memory rather than archives. What history can confirm is that in August 1945, the Kingcobra finally fought openly. When the Soviet Union launched its massive offensive against Japan in Manchuria and northern Korea, the P-63 went into combat at low altitude, its natural domain. Here, the aircraft became the World War II dogfighter it was meant to be. Its roll rate allowed lightning-fast reversals. Its armor saved pilots who flew through small arms fire. Its 37mm cannon shattered Japanese aircraft and tore apart ground targets with brutal efficiency. One engagement stands out. Lieutenant Mirin Nichenko led a flight of P-63s over the Sea of Japan, spotting Ki-43 Hayabusas escorting bombers he attacked from above. His first burst cannon and .50 caliber fire blew a Japanese fighter apart. When another dove on him, he snapped into a hard left roll, using the Kingcobra's unmatched agility to meet the attacker head-on. Both pilots fired. Bullets tore into Nichenko's wing, but his own rounds struck the enemy's engine, sending it trailing smoke as it fled. By the end of the Manchurian campaign, the P-63 Kingcobra had proven itself in roles America never envisioned. Rugged, lethal at low altitude, flexible enough to fight to escort to strike. A true American World War II fighter, but one whose legacy belonged almost entirely to another nation. In the United States, the story of the P-63 Kingcobra unfolded along a very different path. To American planners, the war in the skies demanded high-altitude endurance fighters that could shepherd bomber formations deep into Germany and back. For that mission, the P-51 Mustang reigned without challenge. It was faster, more efficient, and ideally suited to the long-range escort role. Within that framework, the Kingcobra never had a chance. It was judged by standards it wasn't designed to meet, and so the United States quietly set it aside. But America still found a use for this unusual American World War II fighter. If it would not fight in Europe or the Pacific, it would be flown in one of the most dangerous training programs ever devised, Operation Pinball. Here, specially modified RP-63S became armored, bright orange flying targets used to train the gunners who defended B-17S and B-25S. The concept was simple. The reality was anything but. As gunners fired frangible .50 caliber rounds, pilots inside the RP-63S felt every strike reverberate like a hammer against steel. Even with heavy armor, mistakes could be fatal. Yet Operation Pinball saved lives. Hit rates improved dramatically, and bomber crews learned discipline under fire. In this unexpected role, the P-63 Kingcobra became part of a chain of survival stretching across continents. Meanwhile, the broader world struggled to place the aircraft within the hierarchy of wartime aviation. In the West, it lacked the glamour of the Mustang or Thunderbolt. It produced no celebrated aces, no iconic photographs, no headlines. The Soviets, for their part, buried much of the Kingcobra's combat record behind Cold War secrecy. They downplayed Lend-Lease support, minimized American contributions, and allowed the aircraft's role to fade into shadows. Yet, when historians examine the fragments, German reports describing unfamiliar fighters, Soviet veterans recalling machines that defied official records, Japanese accounts of low-altitude battles in Manchuria, a different picture emerges. The Kingcobra may not have shaped American air doctrine, but it profoundly shaped Soviet operations in the final phase of the war. From the American viewpoint, the P-63 Kingcobra was an unproven concept overshadowed by better-known designs. From the Soviet viewpoint, it was a rugged, maneuverable World War II dogfighter that arrived at the right moment and did exactly what their battlefield demanded. And from a global viewpoint, it remains a reminder that the success of an aircraft sometimes depends less on where it was built and more on where it was needed. In the end, the story of the P-63 Kingcobra is not the story of an aircraft that won headlines or carved its name into the great air battles of Europe. It is the story of a machine whose value was revealed quietly through the hands of test pilots, the calculations of engineers, the courage of ferry crews crossing frozen wilderness, and the determination of Soviet aviators who learned to fight with it at treetop height. It was shaped not by glory but by necessity. When we ask whether it was the best American World War II fighter, we must first ask what best means. For the United States, with its need for long-range escorts, powerful high-altitude performance, and global logistics, the answer was simple: the P-51 Mustang was unmatched. The Kingcobra could not compete in that arena. It was never meant to. But war is not one arena, it is many. On the Eastern Front, where battles unfolded below 10,000 feet, where agility mattered more than altitude, where survival often depended on rugged construction and decisive bursts of firepower, the equation changed. In those conditions, the P-63 Kingcobra became something else entirely. A knife-sharp turner, a fast roller, a durable attacker, a World War II dogfighter built in America but perfected through Soviet experience. Its legacy is not measured in kill scores or aces. It is measured in the Soviet pilots who came home because the aircraft no longer spun them into the ground. It is measured in the American gunners who survived combat after training against glowing orange RP-63s. It is measured in the unlikely partnership between two nations whose cooperation was temporary tactical and yet in this case life-saving. History often remembers the pilots who shot the enemy down. It remembers fewer of those who prevented machines from killing their own men. Andrei Kochetkov never received medals or public honor for discovering the flaw that nearly cost him his life. Yet his insistence on truth, hands on the controls, mind against the numbers, saved countless others. His legacy lives inside every Kingcobra that flew safely because he refused to look away. So was the P-63 Kingcobra the best American dogfighter of the war? Perhaps not for America, but for the battlefield it truly belonged to, for the men who trusted it at low altitude, who fought with it and survived because of it, it might have been exactly the machine they needed. If this story resonates with you, we invite you to share your thoughts. Did the Kingcobra earn its place among the great fighters of the Second World War? Your perspective matters, and your voice helps keep these histories alive.